A lot of the reason we do collective talents, both as a podcast and as a video, is so that we can share very concrete suggestions with people who might be starting out on their journey or actually be along this journey already, who want to learn from other practitioners. And so I'm going to ask each of you for some pro tips for aspiring facilitators, right? One thing that they must do and one thing that they shouldn't do during a session. So what tips have you learned have been the most powerful ideas? So Doug's already shared one with us, right? Which is have good participants. But Dawn, I think you have thoughts on this, right?
Yeah, so let me start with one thing you mustn't do, which is to talk more than your participants. You're really there to facilitate the process, to hold the container so that the participants can fill it. And on the things you must do, I first have a sort of half-serious answer, which is you must always use the best Post-its and markers known to mankind.
Absolutely. Amen.
I think everyone here will agree with that.
Spend the money, it's worth it.
Spend it.
Are we doing any product placement?
This will take the podcast in a completely different direction, but a very important one.
Stationery companies, we are available and willing to do product placement.
Only for herself, right?
Get in touch with the birthday collector.
Yeah, but it's true actually. The quality of the stationery matters a great deal.
When the Post-it falls off the flip chart,
Indeed.
It's just the worst, right? Yeah.
You feel like you haven't been heard if your Post-it falls down.
Yeah.
But more seriously, I think the big tip here is around democratizing participation. I realize those are very big words, but the idea is making space for everyone who has made the time to be there to participate. And what this means in very practical terms is something that I often notice when I see other people facilitate, which is someone's dominating the space, right? Maybe it's because they're really emotionally worked up and they really want to get their story out, or it could be a very powerful person and they're taking up a lot of the space. Whatever the case may be, it's the facilitator's role to find ways to make sure that that person stops. It's very hard to do because you always feel like you're being rude or unkind or doing something that's wrong in the facilitator's book. It's not, because your job is to democratize participation.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Don. Who wants to go next? Doug looks like he has some thoughts here.
So I'm going to go back to design because I think we can only facilitate so much until we have a good design. So a question I often ask myself and when I work with facilitators is, you're going to do this session. At the end of it, how do you want people to feel? What would you like them to say to each other or to their family when they go home about the session? And what would you like people to do? And if we can design a process to get to the feelings, the experiences, and what they really want to do afterwards, then, and if we're confident we can meet that, then we can facilitate our way there. So I would say it really starts with a good design. And actually, can I say I feel a bit guilty about saying we need good participants. Actually, whoever shows up is perfect.
Absolutely,
I think.
yes.
And we go
it's
where
finding the goodness in them, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's very good. Wow, good job, Aaron. Yeah.
Actually, can I go?
I try. I have my moments.
Because actually, the points I wanted to make builds on that. I was going to say, not trying to be corny, but every participant a good participant. It's true.
It's really true.
That goes to the do, right? That you said do's and don'ts. Yep. The do that I was going to suggest is, I think it's something that's been useful for me is to remember constantly that everyone who comes to a facilitated process, I mean, apart from in schools, I think everyone is a grown adult, right? And I think, especially in Asian society, again, many times the one experience that most of us have had with some sort of facilitated discussion has been in school, right? And so many people come to sessions kind of expecting a teacher-student relationship where you have to listen to the person in front of the room. And sometimes facilitators come in also with a little bit of a teacher-student mindset where you're like, I'm here to guide you, right? And in some way, that implies that I know better than you in some way. And for me, remembering that everybody in that room is a grown human being, a fully adult person who has every right to make the decisions they want to make, who has every right to put in what they want to put into the session and not put into the session what they don't want to put into the session. It helps me remember, right, that it's there's no such thing as a difficult participant. There's only a participant with difficulties.
Very nice, Sheila.
Right?
Very nice.
It's just remembering that, look, it's ultimately I'm going to be there, pose some questions, create an environment and give permission for people to talk about things that maybe they don't otherwise have the opportunity to talk about in their normal lives. And it's up to them to take it. I cannot force them to have the discussion I want them to have. They are, they have every right to get what they want out of the session and to not get what they don't want to get out of the session. And I have to be okay with that. So it's kind of like relinquishing that control. And to tie into the don't, It's again building off what Doug said earlier. I 100% agree with Doug on how important design is in a facilitation process, especially with timekeeping and things like that. But the don't, it sounds like I'm contradicting Doug. I'm really not, but it's don't be too dogmatic about your process either. Have a process, go into the room, have a plan, but be prepared to change that plan on the fly because every group is different. Every dynamic is different. You might wake up that morning and there might be a huge piece of news, like, I don't know, onset of a global pandemic, and you go in and suddenly the topic you wanted to talk about that day or the design you wanted to have for that day no longer works, right? And you've got to be ready to change that. Or you read the room. If people are tired, do they need this part shortened? Do they need a break where you hadn't planned a break? So the advice I try to give myself is don't be too dogmatic about my process, no matter how lovingly I designed it.
So just to support that, I don't think I've ever been called dogmatic. Have I?
You've been called dogmatic.
Oh yeah, so having a good sense of humor also helps. Yeah. So I guess to that point, right, if we need to have a process, if we don't have a process to start, then we're in trouble. So it's a process that we at least have a foundation that we can be flex from. But the other point, just to add, Marv Weisbord, who is kind of a OD pioneer for 60 years or so, he talks a lot about, to your point, about when we're in front of the room and we have the role of facilitator, there's some people in the room who are going to like us and some people who are not going to like us. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with we're the teacher authority in front of the room and people have issues around that. Some good, some not so good. So how do we level that off? How do we get them to see what you said, right, Sheila, which is that we're just there to guide the process. We're not in control. We're not trying to control anything. We're helping them guide to where they want to go. Yeah.
Prakash, do you want to go next?
Okay. So when you talked about do's and don'ts, I just did a series in the last couple of months of training facilitators, the public servants actually, in order for them to facilitate the Singapore Together conversations. Right. So the first time when I was told, okay, can you help the public servants? So I had to design a lesson, right? So they said, I asked how much time. It says 3 hours. So in 3 hours, I was supposed to say what is facilitation, right? So I realized
listen to this podcast.
Exactly. So I should have just said, be Doug, that's all, channel Doug, something. But so I realized that I can't possibly list down all the things that you can, do's and don'ts of facilitation. There is a list. I mean, I do share that slide and I say, just ignore that, right? But the thing is, right, so one of the things I do tell them, and particularly because they're public servants, is that number one, right, recognize that you are not important in the process, right? So your role is really just to create that space, to make sure the markers are working, the post-its are fine, they stick. But more importantly, right, it's about bringing, so what Dawn talked about, what Doug does, right, bringing the entire person into it. So you're not, I know we all wear different hats, right, and we all have different things as you come into a room or before we embark on something. The question now is really just being yourself and being 100% yourself and going there and being honest. So it's not about lying. There's no, so the ones who say, oh, can you write a few jokes that you normally do? Because typically I try to throw in a couple of those things. So I said, look, if you're not funny, then you're not funny, right? Right. I'm looking at some of you now, but if you're not, you're not, right? So don't bluff, right?
You do you, right?
Yeah,
you do you.
Just be yourself, right? So whatever your strengths are, just do that. But be yourself, and then as long as you want your participants to be themselves, then you be yourself. You mirror exactly that. So that was my one big do that I told them to do. And the don't bit is don't be the one who speaks more than the participants, right? Exactly that. If you find yourself, because at the end of it all, especially when it comes to Zoom, right? So I found that because they can't see each other stop, right? So normally when we can read, like right now, I can see when you're about to stop, I can jump in, right? You can't do that or not as well online. So you may end up having to call names. So when you do that, right, you end up becoming the teacher, right? So you wait for the teacher to call you before you say something. And that's not really a conversation. That's a question and answer session. So I said, deliberately, find ways. And I taught them little tricks or mechanisms that you can do to not do that. But be wary of being that. And that even for face-to-face, right, it's the same thing. Yeah. Because we are so used to the teacher-student or the person in front of the room and the rest of us mentality, right, that we don't end up talking to each other. We end up talking to the person in front.
One of my favorite tips actually is when you get each person who's spoken to choose the next person to go next, right? Because then you have a certain dynamic and it's utterly unpredictable, but everybody does get their time in the sun. Speaking of time in the sun, Lewis, let's have you go.
Yeah, so for me, I think the one thing a facilitator should really do is to be comfortable with awkward silence. And this is really important for the extroverts, right? Because for them, when you're facilitating a session, especially a room of strangers, it takes them a while for them to get used to it. And so then there'll be this silence over there. And then for extrovert, you have this compulsion to really jump in and say something, right?
So hard.
Yeah, but
Extroverts are now stepping forward.
yes. So it's really about having that restraint and really, a very practical tip is just to count to 10 and just wait for the silence.
10, that's a really long time.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, nobody?
Yeah, so that's for the extrovert. And then for the introverts, I guess for you, the good news is that you're actually perfect for it, right? Because for you are comfortable with silence. So great. So please join us as the facilitator, joining the journey. For the don't do, right? I guess the one thing I always is mindful about is not being overly ambitious to the design of the session itself. So more often than not, people want to save the world, solve poverty, and stuff like that within just a 3-hour session.
Oh, 2.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
With a break in
With a
between.
break, yes.
Yeah, so really trying not to be overly ambitious and keeping in mind who are you bringing in the room, especially if there are people who don't usually get to see each other. You really need to design time for them to first get to know each other better. And one thing that Dawn has taught me really well is this practical tip in terms of just doing basic math, right? Imagine you have 2 hours, so there's 120 minutes, and you have 3 questions, you have 10 participants. So how many minutes does each person actually have? And if it's just 2 minutes, is that really realistic? You want them to share about themselves, their lives, things like that.
Will they feel heard?
Exactly.
Aaron, could I just jump in here to ask you to share your top do and don't?
I have probably too many. But building off what Doug said about design, right? I think really focusing on the whole experience that people have is absolutely critical. So in addition to everything you guys said, my favorite things are, one, to make sure there's natural light in the room. I'm not dogmatic about it, but I think as far as possible, I'd rather have that because that lends so much more of a different kind of energy to people when they are part of a discussion. So natural light. I try as far as possible to make sure the chairs are either very light or have wheels on them. And this is not just a logistical thing. It's about allowing people freedom of movement so that they can go join other groups and speak to each other, because that's what life is, right? Ideas interact with each other as much as possible. And so the more people feel that they can move, the more important then they feel that their contributions actually are. If there are microphones, I try and make sure that there's at least 5 or 6 of them floating around. So it's not just that the facilitator has a mic, but no one else does. Because it goes back to what Prakash said about authority figures. And the last thing may seem a bit quirky, but I try not to allow very deep fried food to be served during the break. Because if we want to bring whole persons here and have them lead healthy lives, then, you don't want them going out and having to eat really unhealthy things during the tea break. So the more I see bananas and apples and, things that are good for you rather than things that really detract from your health, the happier I feel about the overall design of the experience.
Why are you looking at me, Aaron?
I'm not looking at anyone in particular.
And good coffee?
Yes, absolutely.
And tea?
Good everything, right?
Yeah.
Good coffee, tea,
And
drinks, fewer plastic bottles if possible. Yeah.
I don't know. Nasi lemak is good for my soul, though.
Well, you can have that and other options, I think, right? If you feel that you need it. But anyway, I wanted to end off with one last question for all of you, and that's about a more specific piece of advice. We've talked about pro tips for people who are already on the facilitator journey, but I'm going to be speaking now to those who are listening to this podcast and have decided that they want to start being facilitators. They might never have done it before, but they're now keen to get going because they've been inspired by all of you, right? And I'm just wondering, what would your advice be to them? Just one tip, right? What can they start by doing? What should they read? What should they watch? Is there someone they should go talk to apart from the 5 of you? What would that be? What's that first starting step that people can take on their facilitator journey?
I could go first. I think just start trying to do some facilitation, whether it's on a small scale, with friends, with family, official, unofficial. You're going to need to, learn theory and train and observe others along the way. But I feel like the best thing to do is to just start. If you get too caught up in your own head about all the things I need to do to prepare before I can become a facilitator, I have news for you. No matter how much you prepare, I'm not sure I consider myself a facilitator with a capital F, even though I've done a lot of facilitation work. I'm not sure when you meet that qualification, right? When you graduate into, no, you're always learning. So you might as well just start, make some mistakes, make sure you start off in a place where you're okay to make mistakes. You'll learn from the mistakes so much more than you will from a book, although there are good books out there to read, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay. So start by doing. That's great. Who wants to add to that?
Well, I will support that. You don't have to be a professional facilitator. If you're at a meeting, family might not be the best place to start. But if we can,
talk to Prakash on that front and Dawn.
If you're and me, but unless you're really courageous. But I think people attend meetings, and if you attend a meeting, see yourself, put on a facilitator hat, and look at the health of the meeting and see what you can do to move it ahead. And actually, whether it's a beginner or somebody who's a professional, I think there's a few things that are really helpful. So I think Lewis started with being curious. So if we're curious, that will help a lot. I would say to be comfortable with conflict, because when you do facilitate, stuff will happen. So we have to be prepared for that. To be comfortable with power. Sometimes we're facilitating people with more power than us. So how do we become friends and neighbors with people, even though there are different levels? And I think to Dawn's point, I think being non-judgmental, I think that maybe that's the most intense work I've done in my life as a facilitator, is to learn to be more non-judgmental, because it's really important when we're facilitating to be neutral. And if we come across with frustration or anger at something or somebody, that gets in the way. So I think we can build our capability with curiosity and then get more comfortable with power, conflict, and all those and being neutral. Yeah.
I can jump in here. So two thoughts come to mind. One is a very practical one, which is a book you might want to read. And what I found really helpful is a guy called Sam Kainer wrote a book called The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. I think that's the title. It's really practical and it's really easy to read, and it will really inspire you, I think, just with many different ideas. And I think many of us have flipped through that book. The second thing is building on Sheila's idea to just do it. I absolutely agree with that. Just start. And what I would add is, if you have someone in the group who's like a trusted friend, or if you could bring someone alongside you, and after the session, ask the person, what did I do that worked? What did I do that could have been better? I think that would be really helpful in terms of serving your growth as a facilitator.
Right. So almost a mirror, but a person who can give you that feedback. That's wonderful.
That's right.
And actually, if I can just add to that, as you start out in your facilitation journey, pay just as much attention to the feedback you receive that's positive as you do to the feedback that you receive that's negative. We all have a human tendency to zoom in on the critical feedback that we get. You know, you'll have like 10 good comments and you zoom in on the one and you obsess about that one. But the thing is, to become a good facilitator, you need to amplify the stuff you're doing that's working, that's just as important, perhaps even more important than solving the stuff that's not working. Because it's easier to stop doing something, right? And it's harder to amplify something you're doing that's working a little bit and make it work a lot. So find someone who will give you both pieces of feedback and don't let yourself obsess with only the critical ones. Definitely look at the positive ones and think about, how can I do that even better? How can I make that bigger?
Love it. Love it.
Negative feedback? I mean, what's that?
What is that, right?
Yeah.
Is it when you turn over the page?
I see. Okay. Because both pages are blank.
Right, I see.
No, so for me, right, it's something very simple. I think coming back to what Sheila was talking about, right, it's essentially just get out of your own space. I think most of us stop ourselves from doing things because we believe it's not something that we can do, or I don't have the skills enough. I don't have enough of the skills. I don't have enough of the temperament. I don't have enough. It's just get out of your own space and just try. And you know, try with your family. It's okay, only if it's safe. But really just try even small things, right? You can facilitate discussions or dialogues on the bus, on the train. I do that often, and I'm one of those people who are irritating. Now I've been told to shut up because of COVID. I'm not supposed to talk. But really facilitating meetings as well, right? We often go into meetings and say, wow, can somebody please give me back that 1 hour of time? If you can facilitate a meeting so that it gives a better experience for everybody, gets to the outcome faster or better, then do that. You know, just step up and do that. And sometimes it's trying. And so for me, it's just get out of your own space and don't worry about the term facilitator. Don't worry about certifications. And it's a journey. So you learn every single time. Even the mighty Doug is learning even now. Right? He's constantly learning. So that's the important bit, right? It's constantly learning from each other. The Mighty Doug. I'm going to call you that from now on.
Should put that on your
my.
name card.
The Mighty Doug and the Daring
Doug,
Dog.
Dougmatic Doug.
Lewis.
Yeah. So for me, I guess echo what everybody has said about just doing it and also getting feedback. Another point I just like to add is about just observing other people's conversation, both what they do and say and how it affects you, right? Because you yourself as a participant. So when people use certain words or certain tones, you realize actually this doesn't land very well with others. So that you be mindful next time and don't use those words again. So I think that's another practical tip for people starting.
Very cool.
And can I add another book? So I would say the two books, because you mentioned Sam Kainer's book, The Participatory Guide to Decision Making, and the other one is by Marv Weisbord and Sandra Janoff, Don't Just Do Something, Stand There. They're very practical, easy to read, and yeah, those are I think would be, if you're going to do reading, that's a good place. And there's workshops and other things, but those are good. Yeah.
Don't just do something, stand there. That sounds like Lewis's point about silences as well.
Well, it
right?
is because the group is the one doing the work, right? Where they're there to steward and the process. Yeah.
Actually, the best facilitation is when the group is facilitating themselves and just step back and just let them do the work. To me, that's
you've carved out the space already. Right?
Exactly.
And that's great because at that point you can go eat the bananas and the apples at the back of the room and
the
then
nasi lemak.
everybody
you
wins.
must have it.
Everybody wins.
Absolutely. And speaking of everybody winning, to all five of you, thank you so much. I suspect anyone who's going to be listening or watching, either the podcast or video version of this is going to have learned a huge amount. I want to thank you for being part of this space, this space where we all found how our stories interweave with each other and hopefully have helped others who are listening and watching to find some sense of their own purpose, right? And how they'd like to get involved in this both weird and wonderful space that we call facilitation. So thank you very much for being here today as part of Collectively Talents. For those of you listening or watching, I hope you've enjoyed this and I hope you'll be part of future episodes as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Aaron. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Aaron, for hosting.
Thank you for listening to Collectively Speaking by the Birthday Collective. We aim to be a brain, heart, and hand trust for Singapore, focusing on the gifts we can offer to future generations. To find out more, visit our website at thebirthdaycollective.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Birthday Collective. If you enjoyed this episode, do subscribe and drop us a review.